When they first started it, they started having debate, and they've still been debating it.
Do you remember when there, as long as you remember, was there always two different times?
No, I seem to remember. I can't be for certain, but was it during the Carter era when we had like a gas shortage or something, and daylight savings was going to save us energy or something? I could be wrong on that, but
I can't remember, but that may be right.
Yeah.
It seems like I remember it being that way my whole life. But
well,
it seems
I'm
like
older than you.
but they're moving it around.
Yeah.
So you think it's at the end of I remember it used to be earlier, but now it seems to be like it's around Halloween.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
you can go out and trick or treat.
Right, right.
But it ought to be getting soon.
Soon. We can look forward to it.
Do you like cold weather or hot weather?
Well, I'm the kind of person that I can take it either way. I do not let weather stand in the way of keeping me from doing what I love to do, which is being in the outdoors. And I like being outside in the heat of the summer. I'm originally from South Mississippi, and I grew up in a house where we didn't have air conditioning, and it was hot down there, and we just took it. And then in the winter times, we just had some old gas space heaters in the living room, didn't have any heat in our bedrooms, and you learn to deal with it.
Was the average temperature in South Mississippi
Right.
hotter than it is here on the average?
Well, it was at that time. I recall I've been in Cleveland for the most part since the early 70s. I came here to go to Lee and stayed. And so my perception is that it was cooler up here than Mississippi back then. But it sure seems like that it's been getting hotter up here. Mm-hmm. And so I would think that it's almost comparable now.
Maybe it just seems hotter.
I don't know. I know it's hot. I know it seemed to me like when I was a student at Lee back in the early 70s, we'd get more snows back then, but nowadays we don't seem to. We can go quite a few winters without any real snow.
In a row.
Yeah.
Now, when you say early 70s, you're talking about 70 or 74?
Well, I actually showed up in Cleveland, Tennessee with my 65 Mustang packed and my big Sears and Roebuck guitar and amplifier and $1,000 I'd saved. And I said, I'm here, Cleveland. I'm going to Lee College. And so I just knew one thing, that I didn't want to be in Mississippi. So I came here. In fact, enrolled January of 71 and finally graduated in 75 with most of 1 year taken off and spent that time in Miami, Florida.
What for?
Well, interestingly enough, me and some other college students were asked by a professor over there who had invented a water distiller to help him sell some water distillers in Miami, Florida. We were going to make a lot of money that summer, to fund our college education because my parents weren't able to help me. So we loaded up and went down to Miami, Florida, because back in those days they had awful water. I mean, it was on the news all the time about how terrible their water was. So distilled water seemed like a good idea. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that whole process didn't work out. So to make a long story short, as the summer drew to a close, I didn't have any money to come back to school. So I had to stay down there and get me a job, and I got a job.
Would you not have enough money for this next semester?
No, I did not have, because I totally, I funded college myself between it and work study and Pell Grants. I was on my own.
So why didn't you go to a cheaper college?
I was raised in the Church of God, and I just could identify with Lee, and I just enjoyed it. My friends were there. In fact, there were several of my friends who went with me to Miami, and we had that experience together. Mm-hmm. I just never even, it never occurred to me, frankly, to go anyplace else but Lee.
What was your major?
Well, I have an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I have a master's degree in education with an emphasis on community counseling.
When you was in Miami, when you went to work for that the remainder of the summer, what'd you do?
I was a plumber's helper.
Is that right?
There was a fella that we got hooked up with the local Church of God down there, and there was a fella who attended the church, and he owned a plumbing company. And, they just needed some labor to do things like jackhammer trenches in coral or break up concrete slabs in a factory where they were having to replace the sewer line and just things like that. And so I did that for the rest of the year, saved some money, and came back to Lee the following semester.
Where'd you live while you was there?
We actually, a friend of mine and I rented a room from this lady who also attended that church. She was an elderly lady. She was single. Her husband, I think, had passed away. So we moved in and rented one of her rooms. Like
rooms to let, that sort of thing?
Well, there wasn't anything like that those days. It was just, she said, guys, I have a room in my house. It's like a 3-bedroom. It's a big old bedroom with a bathroom. So me and my friend and I both, rented that room together. Mm-hmm. And he worked for the same plumbing company that I did. And so it was convenient for us.
Did you find a sense of urgency to get back to school?
Well, I've always, I guess it was one of the things that my mother really instilled in me. She had a very hard life, and she worked in a packing plant down in Mississippi for the most part, as long as her health could hold out. And it was really, really hard work. And the message that she always shared with me growing up, and back in those days, I wasn't James, I was Jimmy. She would say, Jimmy, get yourself an education so you don't have to work hard like I do. So that resonated with me, and I just knew that I wanted a better life. I grew up in poverty, and I can honestly say that at a very early age, I'm thankful that, my mindset was, I want to see the world. I want to experience the world. I want to have a much better life than my mother did and my parents did. So I knew that I wanted to get back to Lee College so I could finish my degree and make some progress in life to get to that point.
Watching our parents do what they do really helps us if we pay attention.
It can. I feel like that I was blessed to be able to take advantage of that. Unfortunately in life, it seems like that some people can't seem to learn that from other people. They just repeat the same mistakes generationally, and it never changes. But I guess it was just a blessing. I don't claim the credit per se, because like I said, early in life, it was something that just, before I understood the world, it just was something that I knew from deep down inside, in my mind, in my heart, my whole being, so to speak, that I wanted a different life.
Do you think education gives people a different life now than it used to, or is it more important then to get an education?
Well, I'm not sure how I would answer that exactly, to say that always I think education has been very important. And some people seem to be able to benefit more from education than others. It's just like training anybody for anything. Some people seem to be able to benefit from that training and do better than others. If you wanted to teach a person to run a welder, some people become phenomenal welders. Some people, or many people, become average welders, and some don't ever seem to get it. So I guess I would say the same thing about higher education and every kind of education. Some people seem to benefit more from it than others. And I can't always say what's, the factors that contribute to that.
And another thing, when you go to college, you almost have to decide what you're going to do so early. How do you know at 18, 19, 21 what you want to do the rest of your life? It's always, it's almost like they need a generic education.
Well, I think that may be a weakness in our system.
That's what
frankly, that it may be better to have some general things there. I advocate internships, apprenticeships. I think those have always made a lot of sense, where you can actually go out and do something. Because like myself, one of the reasons in analyzing it, since I'm a psychology major, and you get to do those kinds of things, whether you're qualified or not, one of the reasons I pursued psychology was I came from a dysfunctional family. I mean, I'm just being honest with you. There was a lot of dysfunction in our family. And so when I got, and when I graduated from high school, I didn't even know who Sigmund Freud was. We had a great basic education in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but we didn't have psychology courses and things like that. So when I came to Lee, it took me a while of interacting with others, taking classes and what have you, to figure out that, I think I like psychology. And I was drawn into it because of trying to figure out my own family and the dynamics and understand, why would people do what they've done and be the way they are. So it drew me kind of into psychology and the whole human services arena. And as I started down that path, certain doors opened, and we came along to a point in career where, I did this versus that.
There's always you can always look back at our lives and say, well, if I'd have turned left instead of right, what would have happened? I don't know if we can ever answer those questions. Do you?
Well, unless we had a time machine. Interesting enough, I think there's a show on TV, Ordinary Joe, right now, that I haven't seen it, but from the previews, it looks like that's the premise of the show, that, they look at different scenarios. But we all can, but, life's kind of like a river, at any point, if you go down this fork or that fork, it's going to be a different experience. But you just don't know which fork necessarily is the best one, and frankly, where it's going to lead.
And it makes you wonder if you went right or left, if we really have an effect on things anyway.
Well, I think we do. I think we do have an effect on things, and it's interesting that you would bring that up, because I was reading recently in a book. It's about science and the near-death experiences, and the fellow goes into a lot of quantum mechanics and the whole theory of how our universe and physics works today. And he said that there was several things that really resonated and stood out to him as to what would cause us to know that we could make an impact on things. And one of them, it's a little device called a random event generator, which, to tell you what it is, it's basically an electronic coin flipper. And now if you randomly flip coins over a large number of times, you're going to get 50% heads and 50% tails. Well, in their little thing, they can ask people, in their experiment, they can ask people to influence the outcome. And the interesting thing is that statistically, the outcome is influenced in the direction that the people want it to be. Now, that's powerful information.
That's powerful.
Powerful information. Now, not like you were to say, well, make these all be heads.
Or move this chair.
Or move this chair. But there is quantifiable research evidence that shows that effect is there. Another thing he pointed out, and I hadn't thought about it this way, but it's true, and it has to do with the placebo effect. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, like they'll do random tests for stuff and give some a placebo and give some the real drug.
According to him, they said that the research shows that in about 35 to 45% of the cases where the person is given a placebo, they get better. And the way they determine if a drug is effective or not is if it's 5%. Now, only 5% better than a placebo.
That's unbelievable.
Then they say, okay, we can sell you this prescription for $1 million or for $1,000 a whack, because it's effective. So, and I've heard of studies where they tell somebody that you're getting a cancer drug that's going to make your hair fall, or it could make your hair fall out. And it's a placebo, and the person's hair falls out. So, those are things that I think that if you really look at it, it shows that we as human beings have an impact upon our universe.
That we don't understand.
That we don't completely understand, and we don't always acknowledge that.
And you're not making this up, because
No.
I've heard this.
No.
But for these people to make a placebo pill have to exceed 30%. That tells me that even they recognize that that has. But and it goes back to, I guess, what Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, right?
Yeah. Well, I remember one book I read when I was attending Lee, and it was I think it was called Mind Games, and they compared the cure rates of psychiatrists and witch doctors, and guess what?
No difference.
No difference. It's what you believe. It's what you believe.
Well, let's say that let's say I'm going to go outside and it's cold. If I say, boy, it's cold, I'm going to freeze myself to death. That's one thought. But if I say, boy, the air is clear today, and this cold air just feels so fresh and brisk, I love it. Would you be cold? Or as cold?
Well,
I guess you wouldn't, based on what we're saying.
Let me share you this personal experience. Going back to my days at Lee, I don't know if you've ever seen the series Kung Fu.
I
Did
have.
you ever watch it?
Kane, yeah.
Kwai Chang
Yeah,
Kane,
yeah.
It's time to leave the
Yeah,
temple grasshopper, kind of thing.
Well, it was a good show.
Well, we had this guy at Lee. He was a student, and he taught Kung Fu. And so I took Kung Fu for a while, and I religiously watched that show because I was so fascinated, and I understand that was a show, but, part of it is based on some truth.
That guy was a real Kung Fu artist.
Yeah. They would, I remember one night, the bad guys put him in a box kind of outside, and it was freezing, and they expected him to be an icicle the next morning, and the next morning they went there and he was fine. And so me and several of my friends who were in the Kung Fu, it was cold at Lee that night after we'd watched Kung Fu. And so we took our shoes off, we took our heavy coats off, just had a t-shirt on, and we decided, well, we're going to go walk around out here. And instead of fighting the cold and being, oh, it's cold, that I'm going to embrace it, just embrace it. And you know what? I was not cold. I had an experience of not being cold. And it wasn't just like, well, I've been in some situation where I'm not scared, and you're really scared and you know it. Or, I'm not this and I'm not that, and you really are. You're just trying to tell. But there was a definite experience there where I did not feel the sensation of coldness. Now, I have not been able to achieve that with any regularity as a practice, but I'm saying that experience to me was real. So I identified, and I would think that somebody who embodied that idea and believed that completely and practiced it regularly could practically perform miracles in that area.
I've noticed the people that I work, the subcontractors, that don't get. If you show me a guy that's been in the military, he won't get cold, he won't get hot. The rain won't bother him, and the heat won't bother him. That's got to be similar to the same thing.
Yeah, mindset. It's a mindset.
It's a mindset. And so what else do we have a mindset about that's, I guess it's everywhere.
Yeah. Well, it's back to that point I was making earlier, is our mind can have an impact upon our physical universe.
You know what they say the biggest nation in the world is?
What's that?
The imagination. But yeah, I think there's scientific. We're not hypothesizing here. This is real studies.
Yeah, and we're not Looney Tunes. This isn't
tinfoil hats and stuff. Yeah.
But this is coming out of real science. And if you read much about quantum mechanics, he said, which I don't claim to understand it much, but it is so fascinating and it blows your mind, because the universe isn't exactly like we've been thinking.
That's what I think.
You know.
And they say the world will give you what you ask it. You ever heard that saying?
I've heard it, and that is in line with what we're talking about.
It really is.
Yeah, because, well, it's just the mind has more power than we think it is, and sometimes we don't utilize that fully with full knowledge and intention.
Maybe it's just to go ahead and ask and assume, and play like it's going to happen.
Well, I'll tell you a situation. My wife and I were talking the other day, and she was talking about how she went to this particular gathering, and she knew she was going to win the door prize. And sure enough, she did. And I think of myself, I went to a business meeting in Atlanta one time where they were giving away a 32-inch flat screen TV back in the days when a 32-inch was something
a big
to be
deal.
had. And I went around that entire week telling people I was going to win that TV because I don't know how I knew it, but I felt it completely. And guess what? I came home with that TV. And it was... It sounds weird, and you don't know where those things come from. And again, I've filled out pieces of paper and other drawings, other lotteries and stuff, and that feeling wasn't there. That sense of knowing, but it was then. It was just like a light, the light's on or it's off.
Now, we go out here and say, I'm going to win the lottery next weekend. I'm going to win the lottery. Obviously, that doesn't always work.
No.
But there is some level of changing events by, and some of these athletes, they say, how did you win? I imagined it last night. I played it in my head, and I saw myself doing this, and I saw myself doing that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that, and that's pretty well traditional psychology, sports psychology today, where the person rehearses, they focus on the outcome they want. Yeah.
That is a whole nother thing. I tell you, and it goes back to the simple part. I mean, that's an advance, but the simple part is just to think positive, not to think negative. Seems like, and negative thinking seems to migrate to other people too.
Well, it's kind of, even if you go back to the Bible, the principle of sowing and reaping. If you want a crop of beans, then it's best to sow beans.
I always think about that verse that says, "Seek and you will find." I'm not sure if it's talking about salvation or just the door prize.
Well, I think it could be lots of things. That could be a general principle or a general law of the universe, so to speak.
Maybe there's minute, minuscule things we do that make it happen because we're positive thinking, and we think that we're just doing it mentally, but it's because of the other nuances that we do. I mean, you bought a ticket.
Yeah. Obviously, I wouldn't have bought it if I hadn't bought a ticket. Yeah. There are certain things you have to do. Yeah. I agree. There's, where...
And maybe somebody else said, well, I'm not going to buy a ticket. James going to win it. And there was less to draw from.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that I knew and I did.
You've always been a positive thinker, though.
Well, I try to be, because I really, and I would have to credit my mother for that to some extent.
Was she a warrior?
She was the kind of person that she felt like the entire world was basically against her, and that, she just had to persevere. And she was, I guess I would call her a person with lots and lots of perseverance. And so I think to some extent, positive thinking is a form of perseverance. And so, I think it's a better, it's better to show up positive than just show up. But just showing up is a good thing too in most days. Yeah.
Sometimes all you can do is just show up.
Yeah, because some days you don't feel very positive. We all suffer from, Lord knows, we live in a time right now where there's lots of anxiety. There's just, we're bombarded with so much information all the time that as human beings, frankly, I don't think we're biologically and sociologically ready to deal with all the input we have. And it's a struggle,
Used to, we'd get a magazine or a newspaper and have a little bad information. Now it comes at us, they're shooting us with shotguns with it.
24 hours
24
a day.
hours a day. And if you ever notice these morning shows, they'll have good news and then bad news, good news, bad news, good news, bad news. It goes in that.
And then they try to say something.
Then they say you something. And it's always, oh, I hate to hear that. Oh, boy, that's good news.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate to hear. It's just back and forth, and they're always toying with your emotions.
And used to, it was maybe 30 minutes, but now it's 3 hours.
Yeah.
Or some people 24 hours a day. And then, of course, Facebook is an entirely different one. Lord, it's constantly,
And YouTube
the
and
algorithms, that puts information in front
And
of
if
you.
I look at a pair of shoes, if I order a pair of shoes from Amazon, they'll show me 4 tomorrow that are cheaper price that look the same.
Yeah.
And that's confusing.
Yeah, it's like, why did you do this to me?
Yeah, I've already bought the shoes. Why didn't you show them to me before?
Yeah. It's like I say, that's one of the reasons I like to go hiking, is to get away from some of that stimulation.
Tell me about, now first let's go into this, because I know you're an avid hiker now. But prior to that, you were James Anderson, head of Family Resource Agency. You were the man. How did that come about? Because that's not a small operation.
Well, it started out small, but when I left, it was much larger. Just to give you a brief summary of what happened, I was working at the Department of Human Services, investigating abuse and neglect, and I thought that I was going to get an opportunity to teach college, which was certainly something I was interested in doing. So in order to do that, I was going to have to get a master's degree to get my foot in the door. So I resigned and from my position and finished up my master's degree. Well, to make a long story short, that didn't work out that way. That position wasn't available. There was some issues with the institution and their financing at the time that created that obstacle. So I needed a job. And so I looked in the good old Cleveland Daily Banner back in the days when there was help wanted ads in there, and it said executive director needed for a small nonprofit. So I answered the ad, and turned out it was for the organization was called Cleveland Daycare Centers Inc. at that time, and they operated several publicly funded child care centers. And they hired me as the executive director, and after a couple of years, I got kind of bored, and I thought they could, this organization could do more. So there was a regional organization that had some financial mismanagement problems, and they lost their Head Start grant because of it. So I said, well, I can write. I was editor of the college newspaper. I can write term papers, so I can write a proposal for a grant. And I'd never really written any big one before, but I looked at it, answered the questions, wrote it. Make a long story short, we got it. So we got into Head Start then. So that caused us to spread into 4 counties of southeast Tennessee in Head Start. Then years later, an agency in North Georgia had a financial problem of mismanagement, so we wrote a grant to take over that one. So we took over 6 counties of Georgia, took over a couple of more things. Along the way, we added a family violence program too. So when I started the organization, we had, I think, 12 employees and a budget of about $200,000.
Now this was when it was
a child care center,
yeah.
Back in 1981. And when I left, we had the neighborhood of about 500 employees and a budget of about $24 million a year.
God.
So,
Describe the first day on the job.
Lord, I don't know that I can even remember the first day, except that I had a big manual. There was a lady there that, in fact, she was a local lady. She went on to become an attorney after she left the organization. She shared with me a lot about what to read. There's lots of rules and regulations. And I've always been the kind of person that, I get it. I'm a rules and regulation kind of guy. So that came pretty easily to me. And I, you go to college, you can learn, you can read. So you read all these manuals, you read about how to do things and what not to do. And so did all that and, made a career out of it. Stayed 38 and a half years.
And how many, you have a board of directors was over that.
Right.
What was that, 12 or 10?
Well, it would vary. Sometimes there would be 8. Normally we would have 10 or 12. Sometimes I think we got up in the high teens. It would vary. But I don't know if Lily Frank Fitzgerald.
I've heard that name my whole life.
She used to teach. She was on our board way back in the early days. Now, she wasn't one of the, let's see, there was the 3 ladies that hired me, Ann Moss, Ted Moss's wife.
Oh, I know
believe.
Ann real well.
Nancy,
she's really nice.
Nancy Word. I can't remember what her husband's name was, and Doctor. My mind. Oh, his wife was on the board. He right up the road, right down the road.
Not Kyle.
No. It'll come to me. I'm a senior. I had a birthday last week, so you can forgive me.
How old are you now, James?
69.
69.
Yep.
You're in good shape for 69.
Well, I think so. I just yesterday went out and got a certification to use crosscut saws in the wilderness.
Now, let me ask you this. Why would you need a certification to use a crosscut saw?
Well,
what is a crosscut saw?
Well, you remember these big old long saws that have a handle on each end and have teeth and
and
the
2
wood,
guys.
Paul Bunyan, the guys,
Yeah.
from those days. Well, I'm a volunteer trail maintainer for the Benton Mackay Trail Association, and of course we have a trail that runs in the National Forest, and so in order to maintain trails, you have to abide by the Forest Service regulations.
Which is right down your alley, following the rules.
Yeah, and so the Forest Service says in order to cut trees and do this kind of work, you have to be certified. And so they have to have this class, and so we went through, and it's interesting because it teaches you about safety and how to use a crosscut saw properly and how to, assess, the hazards.
Where it's going to fall.
Where it's going to fall, or if it's already fallen, where the bind is, where the compression is, all those kind of things. And if you want to get it to roll in a certain way, what do you do, and all this. So it's very interesting and useful, and I enjoy it because it's a silent saw. You don't have to listen to a motor run.
How long is it?
Well, they vary in length from like this to, some of them, I've seen pictures of them that they look like they're 12 or 14 feet long. So,
now, you've gone into this hiking before you retired.
Right. I started hiking in Lee when I went to Lee, and it was a Lee professor. You probably know him, Don Altman.
Yeah.
When he was a psychology professor at Lee, and of course I was a psychology major, and so I remember the first real hike I ever went on, he said, "Hey guys, I think I'm going to go hiking up Big Frog," because he had gotten into hiking while he was out on the West Coast.
Is that the ramp tramp?
Yeah, that's where they used to do the ramp tramp. And so he had an old green Chevrolet pickup. And if my memory serves me correctly, there was like 12 or 14 of us that went in that pickup truck to Big Frog, hiked it up it. It snowed on us at the top a little bit. And then when we got back down lower, it was raining. And so then we drove back to Cleveland. And that started sort of a love affair of hiking. And in fact, after that, one of my friends and I and a couple more people got him to be the sponsor, and we started a hiking club at Lee, which I don't know if it's still going or not. But
Be interesting to know,
it'd
wouldn't
be
it?
interesting. But he really did have an impact on my life there because I really, enjoyed hiking. And it's taken me. I've hiked all over the world in
So
places.
you hiked while you were working.
Oh Lord, yes. I've gone. I've trekked up Mount Kilimanjaro. I've climbed Mount Shasta. My wife and I have hiked Mount Vesuvius outside Pompeii. I've done the Grand Canyon like 4 times. I've hiked from one end of the Smokies to the other on the AT. All that while I'm working. I take my vacation and go hiking.
or is it mostly week? Can a person go on a weekend hike and enjoy it?
Oh Lord, yes. Yeah.
What time would you leave?
Well, it depends on where you're going and how much you want to do. I mean, right outside of Cleveland in Ocoee, the National Forest is right. Big Frog's not far away at all. In fact, it's over 4,000 feet high, and it's a great hike, especially in the wintertime. And that's a place. There's all kind of trails on top of Mount Chilhowie. Quinn Springs out here is a good place to hike from.
How do you know all these? I went with George McCoy and Tasha Plate, my wife, and we went to a place where, is it Jack River Falls? Where's that at?
Jack's River Falls. Some people call it Beach Bottom Falls.
Beach Bottoms, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of to the southwest of Big Frog. It's pretty much on the line of Tennessee and Georgia.
And there's 2 ways to get there, right?
More than 2, but there's 2.
We went the long way.
Where you did all the creek crossings?
Yeah. It was like 10 miles.
It was the first time I ever went there. I can tell you a story about it. There were several of us from Lee decided we were going to go there. Of course, we didn't have a map. We just heard that this trail went up there. So, here we are trekking along with our old backpacks, in the 70s. And we come to the creek, take our shoes off, go across the creek, put our shoes back on. About 3 or 4 times doing that, we said, this is. So we just, and at that time I had tough feet. We literally, after that, we had our boots hung up on our pack. We hiked barefooted.
Because you just have to take them off.
Yeah, and so we hiked, and it was like, 20-something creek
Oh
crossings.
yeah, it's all you're doing.
But I can still remember to this day, and it follows an old railroad grade coming into the fall. And I can still remember to this day, as I was coming around one of those bends, I could hear the falls. And then I first saw it, and it was like, this exotic rainforest kind of waterfall, and it was beautiful.
And there's people everywhere when you get there.
Yeah, there
I
is
mean,
some
they're all
days.
eating lunch and done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a paradise.
Yeah. Now there's another way that's a lot shorter.
Yeah, we didn't go that way.
They
It's
must have been trying to get you not to go hiking again.
Well, yeah, it was. The other way is like 3 miles.
Yeah. It's
And this way
nothing
was
to
like
it.
10.
Yeah. They took you the hard way.
And Beach Bottoms is different. Beach Bottoms is down here, and the falls are up here. So you go through. Now, my understanding is that used to be a town. Beach Bottoms.
The only thing I've seen there used to be an old structure there, kind of like a hunting camp or something, and you can still go see some old home place kind of, where flowers are planted.
What are those flowers that grow when they're
daffodils?
Yellow.
Yeah, they come out early.
Why is that you always see daffodils where there was an old home place?
I guess because they were easy to grow flowers, and once you put them in the ground, they kept coming back.
Is that the way they landscaped, reckon?
My mother used to talk about how that place they lived in, they didn't, of course, do any landscaping. They would literally hoe grass out of the yard, so they just had dirt in their yard.
But if you show me an old chimney where the house is gone, I'll show you daffodils.
Yeah, they're without a doubt in this area for sure.
In this area, yeah.
Now, in Mississippi, I don't think that was the case, but around here in the mountains, they just seem to be the flower of choice.
Is hiking a sport?
I wouldn't consider it a sport because really there's not much in the way of competition. Now, some people will try to set records, like through hiking the Appalachian Trail, setting a record.
Yeah.
But generally, to me, it's just a recreational pursuit because most people just approach it from the standpoint, we're just going to go out and have some fun, and, it's recreational.
What do you think about when you're hiking? What's your thought process?
Oh, I think about everything. I think about stuff like you and I were talking about earlier, about the universe. Sometimes I like to just listen to what's going on around me, the birds, just looking out in the distance.
Looking far has a medicinal power.
Yeah.
Not looking like this, but looking way out.
Yeah. And I think I don't know this, I've never measured it, but it could be that the oxygen content is greater in the forest because of the trees.
It could be very
well.
And
there's a certain sense of well-being that I have when I'm just out there.
I think it's a sense of, and I don't know if this makes any sense or not, but it's almost like you're not afraid of it.
I sort of feel at peace with the universe.
Yeah,
like
you're
one with the. I'm here. I'm part.
If it's starting to drizzle rain, you're still walking. Let it drizzle rain.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah, and I feel when I'm out there, I feel like, man, I'm part of this cosmos. It's just everywhere. But I'm here and I'm part of it and I'm experiencing it.
And I'm going to that thing. You always have to have a destination when you're hiking, I guess.
I generally do, but sometimes it may be just that we're going to make a loop trail, or something. Now, I prefer hikes where there's good views. I'm the kind of person, I'm a visually oriented person, so I like to see stuff. And in fact, I just like to go places so I can see it with my own eyes and experience it that way. So that's another part of hiking that
Do you take a camera too?
Yeah. Oh, I've got my phone has thousands of pictures from hikes.
What can you do with those pictures? But just look at them again?
I look at them sometimes. I just go through and it helps me remember. And then when I pass away, they can put them on a reel at the funeral home. Say, this is what he did.
Did you start, have you ever done, how much of the Appalachian Trail have you done? Have you ever thought about doing the whole thing?
I've thought about it, but I don't really want to. I've been out 10 days, and that was enough at a time for me. So I'm probably not going to be one of those who attempts the Appalachian Trail. Now, I have done the entire length of the Appalachian Trail in the Smokies, from one end of the Smokies to the other. I've done that.
How far was that?
Oh, about 72 miles or thereabouts.
Do you, when you were gone for 10 days, did you have to take dried food? Did you plan out everything you were going to eat each meal?
Yeah.
I mean, you got to, right?
Yeah, you got to. I mean, you have to take your food with you because you're not like on one of those survival shows where you try to fish and eat, or eat slugs or moths or whatever. Yeah. So it's typically dried foods. Now, what I found is that when I'm out there, for some reason, I don't eat as much as I eat at home. My appetite sort of goes away, and I kind of have to make myself eat. But you do a lot of dehydrated food or food that's easy to pack. You have to be weight conscious because one of the things, especially as I've gotten older, I've tried to get lighter weight backpack, lighter weight sleeping bag, tents, so that I'm not having to carry as much weight, so it helps me to enjoy the experience more.
Would it be two nights typically, or one?
I usually don't go for just one night. Kind of 2 nights my minimum. Our hiking club. I'm president of the Cherokee Hiking Club this year, and
do they have an office or just a?
No.
We're
just a collection of people. We have a website. You can go CherokeeHikingClub.org and look it up and see, the hikes. We have a schedule. It's just people who like to hike.
How many are there?
Well, we have nearly 100 members, but not all are involved. Now, like for instance, next week we're going to do a 5-night camp out up at Big South Fork. That's a car tent camp out where, you're at a state park, but we're going to do day hikes. And there's 23 folks going with us on that one. And so.
One single then?
Pardon?
One single?
Yeah, we have people who their spouses have passed away, things like that. So it's not all couples by no means. And some people, their spouses don't want to hike, so they come, themselves.
Yeah.
Because my wife rarely goes with me when I go backpacking. But we'll do things like as a group. We went out and we hiked in the Rockies a couple of years ago out near Durango, Colorado. We've done the Grand Canyon several times as a group, and in fact we're planning to do a hike in Oregon next year, and maybe also might do one up at Mount Katahdin in Maine, where the AT ends, and sort of like do a backpacking around that area sometime next year.
Do you think that these trips that you go for 2 days, how much do you carry? How heavy is it?
I can do a 5-night backpacking trip where I'm taking everything, including water, my pack, my sleeping bag, everything, and it'll typically be in the 28-pound to 29, maybe 30 at the outside.
Boy, that is light.
Yep.
And the backpack weighs what, a pound?
No, my backpack weighs about 2 pounds and I think 12 or 13 ounces. My tent weighs a little over 2 pounds.
How big is the tent?
Well, it claims it's a 2-person tent, but you would have to like the person really well if they stayed in there with you.
Is it nylon?
I believe it is.
Is it the kind you touch and water comes through it?
No,
You know, those old
no, not the old.
Yeah.
This is a big Agnes that's sort of latest kind of lightweight.
Does it have the poles that spread out?
Yeah.
How big is it?
Well, it's obviously longer than I am.
I mean, if you was to hold it.
Oh, if I would hold it in
Yeah.
it's in a package about that long and about that big around.
That's incredible. How long does it take to set it up?
Oh, if I'm in a hurry, 3 minutes.
You have an air mattress?
I do also have what they call a big Agnes air mattress that, frankly, I can sleep on it as well as I can sleep on my nice
Is it
bed
that
at home.
thick?
Oh no, it's thicker than that. It's about like that.
How do you pump it up with air? How long does that take?
Just a couple of minutes. You just
I'd stop short.
no. Well, actually, interestingly enough, you don't blow it up real solid, because if you blow it up then you roll off. But
Yeah.
if you blow it up where you'll sink down in a little bit, you stay in it, and it's more cushy and more comfortable.
And then the sleeping bags.
It's a down. It's a dry down. It weighs a little over 2 pounds, and it'll keep me warm down to 20 degrees. And that's what I use pretty much. Now, I've even got a lighter weight one than that I use just, in the summertime.
So you say, okay, I'm going to this hike. It's this high up. It's this far. It's this. There's more views. So you consider everything in the hike for what you're packing.
Yeah, you've got to do that because, for
It's
every
not random.
right every 1,000 feet you go up in elevation, you lose 3 to 5 degrees. So if you go up 10,000 feet, it's going to be pretty chilly at night, typically. And so you have to, and you have to dress in layers so that you can take stuff off as you're hiking. And then when you're at camp at night, and I found that down works real well. It's very lightweight, feels great, and it's very insulating. So it's a good material.
Does the backpack, are those tall pole ones like they used to?
No,
have,
I've got one
high
of those.
tech?
No, these are high tech. They have like a mesh suspension system in the back to let you sort of breathe around. They're very adjustable. They're lightweight. They're sort of stated. Now, there's some, like you were saying, that literally a pound or so, but those are, and some of them are very tough, but basically they don't have a frame system of any kind. They're just pretty much, just a bag that you stuff stuff in. But mine has a frame that offers some support.
That you got to take the weight off you got to put the weight on your hips, I guess.
You're
right?
trying to.
Yeah.
You're trying to.
What about in that 5 days, you've named 24 pounds. That leaves you 24 pounds for food and stuff to cook the food. roughly.
Well, yeah, and sometimes I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I don't take food that needs to be cooked. I have found that now in the wintertime I do like hot chocolate and some hot oatmeal and things like that. But if I'm hiking and it's not real cold or anything, there's a good chance I won't even take a stove, because the foods I can eat are food that I don't need a stove.
Like what?
Well, you can eat granola bars.
But what about for supper? Or is that, I mean,
Well, you can take slices of bread and cheese, and you can buy these little packets like at some of the food stores that have like barbecue chicken in them, or tuna or chicken salad or whatever, and you just literally rake that out onto a piece of bread, and you can eat that. And there's pita bread. Tortillas.
yeah, because you couldn't take a loaf of bread, colonial bread with you.
Well, you wouldn't want to. One of the things about backpacking is you just, based on what you're going to eat, you try not to take any extra. And I like to do trail mix too, which I make my own out of the peanut M&Ms and the raisins and things like that. And I like to eat that. That's nutritious for you.
But in 5 days, you're not going to cook hot dogs.
No, because you just, or I wouldn't. I mean, I've seen some people out there. I mean, they try to go backpacking. I've seen guys lugging coolers of beer, or Cokes. I mean, literally, trying to do. I saw a person one time bringing a watermelon, and it's like, you got to be, it's just gonna make life a lot more difficult.
But now you could make macaroni. You don't have a pot. You don't even take a pot with you.
Well, it depends. If I think I need it to mix anything up. But like if I do, like in the wintertime, I'll make a pot of macaroni and cheese out of those Velveeta and cheese things.
But what do you? Because you're taking the pot.
I would carry my stove, and I have a real lightweight. They have a little canister about that big that doesn't weigh much at all, and my stove is literally just a couple of ounces.
So it's like got a little candle underneath it or something?
No, it's not a candle. It's
Sterno?
No, it's the canister of fuel is one of those like isobutane.
Oh yeah.
And you just screw and it's called like a little pocket rocket.
Yeah.
That
I've seen those,
and it has a little fold out to hold your pot.
But the pot, you gotta.
Titanium.
When you pack all that stuff, you got to pack. Well, the pot is probably part of the stove, right?
Well, you have the pot. You put the canister of fuel in the pot. You put the stove on top of that. You put your washing little sponge on that. Your matches in there and all this, and so you wind up with a little thing about yay high and this big around that has all that in it.
Now, how would you boil a whole box of macaroni and cheese?
Well, you don't take a whole box of macaroni and cheese. You just take, like you can buy them in little packets that have everything in a little packet.
Like one person.
Yeah,
like for
one person. You wouldn't do a whole box,
Yeah.
Because you're just cooking. In most cases, you're cooking for yourself only.
Throw some salami in there and you got a deal.
Yeah, or ramen noodles, and then put you a little of that chicken in a pouch that I was telling you about, and there you got you a meal.
What about water?
Well, I have a Sawyer filter that you just, when you come to a water source, you can filter it. You put, you collect the water into a little flexible water bag, and then you screw the filter on it, and then you just squeeze it out into the container that you drink out of.
How clean does it get it?
Very. But of course, it depends on your source. Now, in most hiking situations in this area, this water coming out of the mountains, it's pretty good water. If I had to drink it and not even filter it, I would drink it. But
especially if you're boiling it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but you don't even need to boil this, when you filter it.
How long does that filter last? How many times can you use it? On 5 days?
Oh Lord, yes. The life expectancy of it is just obscenely high. I mean, because when you go back home, you can wash it out by back flushing it. Get you a little bit of chlorine bleach and put in your water, and then back flush it. So that helps clean anything out. So you can use it for years.
What about washing your clothes?
You don't. You don't.
Take a hiking stick?
I do. In fact, I take two of them. They're called trekking poles. And I just was able recently to convince my wife that when she went hiking, she needed, and she said, I wish I'd listened to you 20 years ago.
Do they collapse?
Oh yeah, they're very easily collapsible. Mine's carbon fiber, bought them off Amazon.
So you walk like you're, do you walk like this? Is there, do you have a set stride that you use?
Well, it's kind of like, your opposite foot and hand, go out together and you're actually using those poles to help you along. Not to mention they also especially help you with balance and crossing creeks and dealing with any kind of slippery situation.
Do you have anything, I've seen those on the internet where you can unscrew and they got a compass and a knife and
No, I don't.
Matches inside?
No, I do keep a bunch of duct tape around the
Seems like that'd
pole.
be a good place to put stuff though, like matches or...
Well, most of my when I carry matches, they're with my cooking stuff. I just don't randomly ever need to build a fire.
You have you don't have a fire starter?
I don't carry one because I generally, in most cases, I'm with other people too, and between us we have matches or a lighter, and and we don't always start, have a campfire. Sometimes we do, but it depends on how much energy we have after the end of the day.
So with this group, is there something about having a group? It's like you got a tribe or something.
Well, it's good to be out with people who like to do the same things you're doing. And I found that generally speaking, people who like to hike and especially backpack are really nice people, as a whole.
Are they talkative people?
Yeah, we sit around, and talk at night and talk about hikes we've been on, places we've been. And
is it kind of a kumbaya meeting, or is it more of a, boy, that was a good view?
Well, it's a little of both, I think. You talk about experience, you talk about families, you talk...
Your kids?
Yeah, I mean, you're just, you're spending time with people. And of course, especially if you're on a pretty hard hike, to make it to the top of, some mountain, that you're trying to get to or overcome, a very difficult part of the trail to navigate or whatever, those kind of things. It sort of binds you together, kind of like a team, like a tribe. I think that's probably somewhat of an accurate description.
Everybody wants to be a part of a tribe.
Yeah, and especially we have single ladies who join our hiking efforts, or as I said, people whose spouses, maybe can't hike or don't like it. And so I think that, there's a level of comfort there. You're not just out there by yourself, because there are a few crazy people, out there.
Oh, you hear about it all the time.
And you hear about that. So if you're with a group of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I think you're less likely to have difficulty. Plus, there are some real dangers where, if you slip and you fall and you break your leg and you're 30 miles from your car.
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Thinking as a question, what would you do?
Well, it depends on the level of injury. If you have cell phone service, which thankfully in lots of places, even out pretty far, you can still get a cell phone signal. If you hike to the top of a ridge or something, then you could call 911 and let somebody come rescue you. If you couldn't, then some of our people are former doctors, nurses, EMTs, people who at least have first aid certification, those
Does
kind of
somebody
things.
carry a first aid kit?
Yeah, you really need to carry a first aid kit. when you're-
Everybody individually?
Well, that's typically what's done is people have their own, you know.
You can't assume the other person's going to bring anything.
Right. And there's really, when we go hiking like this, we don't plan our food together. We don't say, well, I'm bringing a first aid kit.
You bring
don't
the
have
cigarettes and I'll bring the beer. You don't do that.
You don't
right
do
there.
that.
They're not
Yeah.
smokers anyway, typically.
Generally not. So you bring your own, and then you would in a situation. There have been some instances where we've had people struggle and people have helped them out. I wasn't on the hike, but I was told about a hike where the EMTs had to be called, and they actually had to hike in, and they were able to bring their four-wheel drive vehicles and actually transport somebody out because they apparently had some kind of medical emergency. They didn't, fall and injure themselves, but they had.
Are people walking like this checking their phone?
No.
The phone is strictly for emergency use.
Yeah. And in this day and time, it's the camera too.
Yeah, that's right.
You got your,
What about battery backup and all that stuff?
Well, I found on my iPhone that if I put it in on airplane mode and the low battery mode, my battery will last me 5 or 6 days.
You can't check your app or play games on it.
No. You couldn't read a book on it.
Can somebody still text you?
Well, what I do often when I'm in places out like that is I'll from time to time, if we're on a high ridge top, I'll turn it back on, acquire a signal, and I'll call my wife or text my wife and say, honey, we're such and such a place. Tomorrow likely I'm going to be down low, so I won't be able to call you. You won't be able to call me. But then the next day we'll probably be up high and I can call you again or text you. So something like that. Now they do make emergency kind of signaling devices that I don't know exactly what all they do.
What about flares?
I've never known of anybody taking flares.
What about a solar battery thing? That's solar and charge the phone. Did you take some of that?
I have one of those, a small one that it's a backup battery and it's also a little solar charger, and I carry it and I can strap it on the back of my pack.
And let it.
Yeah.
Does it do pretty good? Does it charge it faster and it's losing it?
It would charge a bit, but it doesn't charge very fast. I would guess it has to do with the area of solar collector
Or
it has.
moving.
It's pretty,
If
pretty
you
small.
really needed it, you could set and probably set it where it would really.
Yeah. You might could.
How about the generators? Anybody take one of those crank up generators? Where you crank it. You ever seen those? You can crank it and the radio will play, or.
Well, I have a little radio that you do that to, but I've never taken. People out there don't usually take entertainment devices.
You would be if you went on a hike with them and you had a crank up TV or something, that would almost be offensive to them.
Because they're not. Most people, the kind of people that I'm around, want to get away from those kind of things. They're not, so they probably wouldn't like that much.
Do they take soap? You take soap with you?
Oh, yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Toothbrush? Toothpaste?
Oh, yeah.
You got to have toothpaste.
Yeah. I mean, you take all that. Now, you can, you take very small quantities, and sometimes I'll even drill a hole or two in my toothbrush handle to lighten it, by a gram or two. Just anything you can do to save weight.
Does that make a real big difference over 5 days?
Well, if you do it to enough items, it makes a difference. Because literally, if you think about it, well, you remember the saying, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Mm-hmm. That one straw. Or another one I like is, no single drop of rain thinks it's responsible for the flood. Yeah. But, it's...
How about this one? What was that song? The old lady said, every drop counts something. I can't remember.
Well,
Pete in the sea is the thing.
Yeah.
So every little bit helps.
Yeah, and that's it. It's a matter of, well, can we shave off an ounce here, and some of it might be just minute amounts.
But over 5 days, that thing bouncing on your back and you carrying that would get annoying, right?
What? That
I mean,
little
the
phone
weight,
charger
the
thing?
weight, whatever weight it is.
Well, most of them are pretty adjustable now, where they fit pretty tight, so they're not bouncing around.
But a 23 pounds versus 28 is a big deal.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, that when, especially as you get older, I think too, you notice those things. So you want to, now then you get to the idea of trade-offs of comfort. Like if something's really, really comfortable, like
For
instance, there's people start taking chairs that are literally weigh just slightly more than a pound to sit in. They're very lightweight, but they're very comfortable, so you don't have to find a rock or a stump or something. And you think, you make a conscious decision, I want this. Now, if you were an Appalachian through hiker that's going to hike the entire thing, you might want to leave that at home. But since we're not being out there longer than 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 days, then that pound, you can say, well, I'm willing to take this pound because I like sitting in it at night when I'm sitting around talking.
And another thing, every time you get ready to go on a hike, you almost have to read about it and say, how far is this? How much do I want to carry? How much food do I want? It's not, I say, what do you take with you? It would just depend.
Yeah, you do. And most of ours, the hike leader furnishes an itinerary, so to speak, that says, day one, we're going to hike so many miles and we're going to have so much elevation change and we're going to camp at this spot. Day two, we're going to, hike so many miles, so on and so forth, so that you have an idea of what's going to happen, at least what's planned.
Who picks him?
It's usually a volunteer who's interested in going and wants to plan the trip. We don't pick them necessarily.
If they pick a bad place or they get some information wrong, nobody's going to give him a hard time. He was just doing the best he could, right?
Not usually. Not usually. We tease people, because some people are always
like I thought this was 5 miles. We've been walking 7.
Yeah, something like that.
So, well, that's what the map said.
Yeah, it's just good fun.
You ever have anybody get ahead of other people, and are they good to say, okay, I'm walking up here half a mile, but I'm going to stop, and then y'all can catch up, and then is that okay?
Well,
is that protocol?
Well, what we do is we ask people to do this. We realize not everybody walks at the same speed. We say anytime there is a trail junction, we ask that you stop there and wait for the entire group to get
a fork in the road.
Like a fork in the road, another trail.
Wait till everybody gets there?
Yeah, because, one of the things that we're concerned about is safety. So we don't want to leave anybody behind, and we want to make sure that everybody's there and we're all going to the same spot. And that's usually not a great big issue. You'll have your fast hikers, they'll move on up ahead and they'll get there, and there'll be a couple of them and they'll sit around and talk with each other. And then your medium hikers, they'll make it there, and then the others who later, and then they'll need to, and then what happens a lot of times is the fast hikers then
go
on again,
yeah.
And they'll be waiting, but that's just part of it, going as sort of a group. Now this is volunteer, and we're not the police, so if somebody's acting in a way that the hike leader thinks that they're not being safe, then the hike leader can certainly call them out on that. But I mean, the worst is that they just don't get to come on the next one that guy's leading.
Just don't tell them. Don't tell them. They
don't get to come
going.
again. So, we just didn't tell you about that.
But they say that walking every day, like 20 minutes, is the equivalent to all of this aerobic exercises that you don't need all this other stuff. I mean, you're in good shape. You look 65 years old.
Well, thank you.
You've lost some weight too, haven't you?
I have.
Over the summer.
I have. I'm pretty active in lots of ways. I do my own yard work.
Has this been always?
Yeah. I just enjoy. I love cutting grass.
How did you get away when you were working full time in charge of this massive 500 employee thing to go out of town for 2 days hiking and not worry about it? I'd go crazy.
Well, I think it's a part of my personality. I was blessed with the ability to hire good people and then be comfortable in allowing them to do their job. That didn't mean I didn't think about what was going on, but I would always have them trained to a point where I was comfortable with the decisions they would make.
Right or wrong?
Right or wrong.
Leave it as is?
Because none of us always make perfect decisions. We always make decisions that, we always have some decisions that as we get on further down the road, we say, man, I wish I'd done that differently. But that's life. But, if you help them to understand the principles, of how do you go about making decisions? And, in our case, our clients came first. We were there to serve, the community. And, if you made that decision, and our another principle was we expected people to act with integrity, and if something was going on that was awry and they needed to deal with it, and that person was not doing what they should have been doing out there, then hey, I support that, because we wanted to do things right by the book, and legal and moral and ethical and all those kind of things. So again, it had to do with principles. So by the time that we left them in charge with things, and also we function sort of as a team. Most of the people I've ever supervised in my life were very comfortable that they could talk to their people that was on their team or their peers in other departments or whatever, and run things by them too and say, look, we're dealing with this, this is what I'm thinking ought to be done. And so they just weren't left out on their own. And that was, I couldn't even tell you of an instance where I think somebody just did, that something, made a decision that was just horrible.
But it might be a little different.
Well, and that has to do with our personalities.
So we can't manage people to do exactly the way we would do it. I say, well, go ahead and paint this, and they paint it blue instead of navy blue. You can't repaint it. You have to leave it the blue they chose, or else now you start making them question what they're doing, and half the people might like blue and half might like navy blue. Is that the way you think?
Well, I just think about, what's the repercussions
of the decision?
Of the decision that, is it going to make much difference?
Now, are you talking about the reasonable repercussions, or are you talking about, because you could go to repercussions till it's a disaster.
Yeah.
So do you stop at a reasonable degree?
Yeah, I think of reasonable. I like the sort of the legal. What would a reasonable and prudent person do under the same circumstances? And that's not always exactly the same thing. You just have to step back and say, walk me through your thinking, walk me through your decision, and again, I'll be honest with you too, and I would probably challenge you that on any given day, one decision you make may not be the exact same decision you would have made a week ago had you been feeling a different way or had just come from some meeting.
Exactly.
So you just, if you're always thinking, well, say, even though I'm a bit of a control freak, I'm happy to let other people take the wheel for a while. So I don't have to be in control all the time.
And you have to let some things go.
Yeah.
I was building this building one time. I was building it for myself. It was actually a motel. And I was walking around to every room, and I was, do it this way, this way. And finally my painter came up to me and said, Dee, he said, this is good enough, and we just need to open this thing up. So his thinking was more reasonable than mine at the time. I was trying to get it all perfect.
Right.
And that was a ridiculous thing. Whereas he was the voice of reason. He says,
Right.
we just need to get open. Everything looks fine.
Right. Yeah.
But it's hard to let go of that stuff.
Well, it's hard, but it can. You have to, or else it sometimes limits your ability and causes you too much anxiety.
And you
if
can't,
you don't.
And you can't scale that way.
Yeah, no,
You can't scale a business.
Yeah, and you can't. You could if I had been. I remember discussions with our board back before we expanded into Georgia, and they were going to talk about some were asking questions like, "Well, how are you going to manage that down there? How are you going to watch over this and all that?" And the principle has always been the same when we grew at every step was you hire the very best people you can, you invest your time with them in training them and talking with them and trying to get to know them so that you understand them and have confidence in them, and then you let them do their job and always let them know that you're there to support them, to help them work through any kind of difficulty they're having. Always understanding that they're not going to do it exactly like you would do it. They're going to change the recipe up a little bit. Their casserole is going to be different than the casserole you would have made, but by golly, and what difference does it make?
It's still casserole.
Is it still a casserole? People get fed. People say, yeah, this is great. You just can't. When you feel like you have to control everything, it'll drive you to the point of being crazy.
Because tomorrow you make another decision.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do it that way tomorrow.
Yeah. And I tell you, in retirement, I have one of the things I've really enjoyed is not having responsibility a whole lot. I'll be honest
Is
with you.
Is that a bigger relief than you thought it would be?
Yes. Yes, it is.
But you're not making money right now, right? I mean, you're not getting other than retirement.
Right. I mean, I invested when I was working. My wife and I flipped houses for a while. We live below our means, and so we're comfortable. And so I feel very blessed. We made some good decisions. I don't have to worry about finances, and I'm enjoying not having responsibility. And I tell people, I had to grow up early because my mother was sick, and my father was an alcoholic. And I have had responsibility since I was like a preteen. And I was pretty well ready to let somebody else be in charge. And me just do, things like cut trees and cut grass and, just stuff like that.
Was that your escape?
Yeah, it has been to some extent. It's therapeutic for me. I've said, I've always loved to cut grass because one of the reasons I like to cut grass is I can see such an immediate effect.
Over repetition.
Yeah, well, you go out to your yard, and it's shaggy, and it's growing up, and then you go up with your lawnmower and it's all pristine looking. And so much of my life was especially work life, had to do with I was in charge of people and projects and what have you that they had no real end. I mean, they went on forever. And you couldn't stand back. Very few times could you stand back and say, man, that was a really good job. That was a really good project. Like, for instance, you would have satisfaction, I'm sure, in once you build a building. You can stand out front and say, by golly, that looks doggone good.
That's what it would seem like, but the reality is I never feel like I'm finished. So I never get real closure. Because you could always do something else.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Dee.
I mean, you never feel like you're finished. It's a real...
That would not be a struggle for me at all because I've had the things I've done, like in flipping houses and stuff, I was able to completely say, yep, we're done. It's not perfect, but this is the best we're going to do.
But with me, I'm building for someone.
Yeah.
They've got to accept it and refer me to the next one.
But it looks to me like, though, you could still get some closure there because that, when you do the walkthrough and everything, and everybody said, this looks great. Now, that doesn't mean that, 6 months later, if the plumbing gets up, that's life. Stuff's imperfect. But if I were you, I would allow myself to bask in that, just telling myself, that, hey, I'm finished. It
With,
looks pretty.
with a reasonable degree.
With a reasonable degree, you know, not that it's perfect, because we're never going to have perfection, but just stand there and say, and especially if the owner at the time says, Dee, man, I like that.
Yeah.
You did a great job. Allow yourself to accept that. Take it to the bank, so to speak, and use it, you know. And
You know, that phrase, to a reasonable degree, needs to almost be it needs to be something that we say all the time.
Yeah.
With a reasonable degree.
because everything we do has to be to a reasonable degree.
I mean, you came over here, you parked. You say, would you park in the safe spot? Yeah. Well, what if somebody comes with a motorcycle and runs around through there and hits your car?
Yeah.
So we could say, within a reasonable degree,
Right.
you parked in a safe spot.
Right.
Of course, something could fall out of the tree and hit your
Yeah.
car.
Yeah. Yeah.
You might have stopped on a nail.
Yeah. Yeah. See,
You don't go there.
no, I don't. Yeah. You got to you just can't even go down that road, because you cannot control all those things.
But it might happen.
It might.
An acorn might fall on your
But
tree,
you know what? I've got insurance.
and then you go to the next step.
You know, and you think we in the hiking world, you know, people sometimes they have to leave their cars at remote places.
Yeah.
And I'm a part of this hiking forum, and they were asking about, you know, well, do you ever have this, that, and the other? And you know, one of my responses was, well, you go park your car and you just make sure you have good insurance.
That's it. Let them worry about
That's
it.
all.
You're paying for that piece.
Yeah, you're paying for the piece, a reasonable piece, but
Yeah,
even
reasonable.
even then, you can't be assured. You know, you're going to have a deductible.
Yeah.
You know, or something.
Who knows?
And that's the uncertainty of life that, to some extent, you just have to kind of embrace.
Have you always been able to release those what ifs?
Well, I can't always. There are areas of my life that I go through those scenarios of worst case disaster scenarios, but I am able to get past them by talking myself through them. Kind of.
Does it take 5 minutes or 30?
It varies. It depends on the topic.
So when you have that come up, you're able to counsel yourself and say, now listen, James, in the reasonable world, no one would assume that this is going to happen, and you're able to release it that way.
Pretty much, because I kind of come back to that phrase you're using, although it hadn't been that in my mind,
Yeah.
but it's like, you know, what would a reasonable and prudent person do under the
I think you came up with that idea,
Well,
that statement.
Well, I'd heard it from a legal show or something like that. But, you know, just that's kind of
Yeah.
the way I've, you know, and then I say, well, I'm not God. You know, I can't control everything. I don't know everything. I'm not competent in every single thing. So, you know, by golly. And then part of it is knowing myself that I am the kind of person that I will try to do the best I can on most every day. I'm sort of obsessive in some ways. Like I may have 4 plants that I planted out there, and I'm concerned about giving each plant an equal amount of water.
Yeah. You have ADD?
No, I don't have ADD.
I have a little ADD.
I have a little bit of obsessive compulsive.
I think that's ADD, isn't it?
I don't think
I
it's
think
the
that's
same, but I'm obsessive about things sometimes, and I am a control. My wife tells me I'm a control freak, and I do try, and I admit that I do try to control too many things, but I fight myself on that. But
You seem to be to handle it well.
yeah. I think the struggle is more internal, and it's just a predisposition to be that way, but then I can sort of analyze my way out of it and talk my way through it and get past it.
Do you think in business that when you're in management, it's important not to show your feelings on your face? Or does it matter?
Well, I prefer to try to be, constant and not be easily provoked and show feelings easily. And that's the kind of person I've sort of been all my life. Mr. Spock on Star Trek.
Yeah.
He was,
what was it?
he was part Vulcan.
He was part Vulcan.
Yeah.
That's why he had some feelings, right? Because he's part
well,
human.
he was part human, but he really agonized it. And interesting enough, he was, as I told you, my home was dysfunctional, and I used some of his techniques to deal with life and dealing with my home life when I was a kid. The emotions, struggling to control the emotions.
Sheldon on Big Bang does that.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
But you say you had a dysfunctional home. Maybe we all do. I mean, none of us is like Leave It to Beaver, are we?
Well, I will tell you, let me just say that my father turned into a raging alcoholic. And I mean, literally, and I was thinking about this the other day, probably around the age of 11 or 12. My dad would typically get drunk every single day. And domestic violence started in my home.
Not just buzzing, domestic violence.
Yeah, domestic violence.
Hitting or just yelling?
Both. And, and you just, and my mother was sick. She had, I think, every disease and ailment known to man, probably part of it was stress. And she was in the hospital a lot and some things like that. So I would say, having studied psychology and been familiar with dysfunctionality, my family was toward the extreme end of the scale, as opposed to, no families are perfect.
Yeah.
And then you're right, there's Leave It to Beaver, that was TV. Yeah. But most people, they had more going on.
Yeah, my dad never beat my mother. So that's a big plus, right?
Yeah, that's a big, and if you grew up in a family where your dad worked and he used his money to invest in the family and, to help the family, then that was a good thing. Mine wasn't. I remember as a kid, our roof started leaking. My dad wouldn't do anything about it. So I had to use my part-time work. I was working, I'd mow yards and do stuff like that, and saved up some money to buy the shingles to fix our roof. And that was as a teenager. So, most kids don't grow up in that kind of house.
That's got to have an effect on you.
Yeah, and it has. And it's made me be a very independent person who didn't want to ask for much help, always wanted to do it yourself. And it also made me, I decided, kind of getting back to what we were talking about earlier, I decided at an early stage in my life that I didn't want to live life that way. So I came to Lee. I met a young lady who, interestingly enough, from Virginia, grew up in a home situation much like mine. We didn't know exactly what we wanted, except that we didn't want to lead the lives that we came from in our homes. And so we've been married married in 77, so what's that, 41, 42 years now. And, we've had some success in our life, and our house hasn't been like the way we grew up, so we've been able to accomplish that.
Do you think hiking, a 2-day hiking trip or staying 2 nights, is a lot like life, and you sort of, the repetition of walking like this, is that like your daily thing, and you're going to this? Am I making any sense?
Well, I can see that analogy. I mean,
you're just being kind.
Yeah.
Can you really see it?
Well, if I were a preacher, I could use it. I could develop a sermon on it using that. But there's some similarities.
Because people that have OCD and ADD, it helps them to do repetition things. It's something about writing stuff down or walking or.
Well, most people find comfort in structure, and what you're talking about, that's structure.
That's it. And that's what a lot of families, they say that kids that grow up in a dysfunctional home, that they lack structure. It doesn't matter really, that's what happens with kids go to different schools. It's structure, repetition.
Yeah, I think that it's important to have structure in your life, and that's a good thing.
And that's not, a lot of people would say, oh, that's negative. You're retired. Why do you worry about structure?
Well, I think, most people need some sense of purpose in life.
What's yours?
My purpose right now is to do good things for the world, for the community, and to travel and enjoy myself. And I don't feel bad about that because I feel like, I've spent most of my life working in jobs or careers that the overall objective was to help my fellow man and to help them lead better lives or get an education.
You started by fixing the shingles.
Yeah, and so I feel like that, I participated in the American dream. I paid my dues. I've been that solid citizen. I've shown up. At an earlier point in my life, we were active in the church, and we did all these, and we taught Sunday school, and we led this, and we led that, and we did that, and we raised our kids right, and we took care of them, and all that. So I don't feel the least bit guilty about saying, okay, my wife and I, we can enjoy life now. Now, that doesn't mean we're just hog wild on things, but, our intent now is to enjoy ourselves, our retirement, and like I say, keep doing things that, like I'm the volunteer that I help, trail maintenance. I'm also a member of the Lions Club, and in fact, tomorrow we're doing a eye screening for the kids at I think Black Fox. So, we're doing those kind of things. So it's not just that I've turned totally inward on myself, but we're trying to lead a balanced life. Also, we're active in the life of our grandson. He's 8 years old, and we love to take him out hiking and into the woods and offer him experiences too. So we're just enjoying life, and I like being retired.
Is there something spiritual about hiking?
I think so.
What's your definition of spiritual?
Well, for me, spiritual has to do with sort of being in touch with the universe and ultimately the creator, or developer of the universe, however that came into being. And so I think that, and to realize you're part of the universe, I think I read something where the bone in your teeth or some part of your teeth is really particles from a star, and it's just, sometimes we in our feeble little minds just see the world as such a small place, but if you get out into the outdoors, you can see that the world is larger. And then if you look up into the heavens and look at the Milky Way, you think, gosh, I'm looking at the Milky Way, and it's just one little tiny galaxy that's part of an entire cosmos. So, you can just get overwhelmed almost thinking about the vastness of the universe there. And to me, that's a part of spirituality.
Even thinking about that, if we was in Italy, when you came in, I'd kiss, like they do. But we don't do that.
No, we don't do that.
We say, why don't we do that? Because we're American.
Yeah.
Well, you take that one little thought and you multiply it times all these different cultures and everything. Why are we just doing what we're doing and we get consumed? Not just that, but I mean it's like the lady that she kept cutting the end off of her turkey, at Thanksgiving, and her daughter did it, and one day her husband said, "Why do you cut the end off of it?" She said, "I don't know. My mother always did that." And she asked her mother, and she said, "I don't know. Your grandmother used to." And they said, "Well, why did you?" They finally asked her, and she said, "Well, my oven was too small."
Yeah.
So we get stuck doing these things that are just out of culture or repetition.
Well, one of the things that my wife and I really enjoy doing is travel. And I think travel really opens your eyes to how other people live. I think back I was able to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in 2008, and we made friends with our guide who guided us to the top. And after we got back down, he invited me to go home with him, and his wife was going to cook us a meal. And the other guys, you know, they went off to do something else, but I went home with him, and I got to know him and talk to him. And even though he lived in a world that was so different than mine, we had the same desires. You know, we have the same fears. We have the same concerns. You know, so, you know, we're brothers. You know, and there was a bridge built between us there, and I think about him from time to time and wonder, well, what in the world's he doing these days?
Maybe you can hit him up on Facebook.
Well, I thought about that driving over here today. As a matter of fact, I know the company that he worked for, maybe trying to contact them, because he had he had said that he wanted to go back to school and become, I forget what he said he wanted to become, but I'd like to find out if he ever was able to do that. But we've just enjoyed seeing how other people live. You know, I think that if we spent more time doing that, we would be closer to each other rather than more divided. Instead, I think our world has a tendency just to divide us, because basically what people are doing is throwing rocks at each other all the time.
That's all they're doing.
Nothing good comes out of anything in terms of the leadership or anything. They're just, you know, all we can do is bash the other one and call them idiots. And I say that for both sides, you know, and it's just such an unproductive, stupid way, because like it or not, we're all on this little rock, the third one from the sun, and at this point in time, we don't have the technology to leave in any great numbers and know where to go. So we better learn to get along a little better.
And who's got this time? And we're only going to be here, what, 100 years at best?
Yeah.
My uncle said some people live to be 90, and the rest of us suffer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so why argue? Let me ask you this.
Sure.
Packing back to this hiking and packing very light with just these few items. Could you see the advantages of living that way? How the minimalist, not necessarily become a minimalist, but can you realize how they got to that train of thought?
Oh yeah, and I think even now I've especially in retirement, because I don't have to dress up much anymore. I'm giving lots more to Goodwill.
And you got a 2-story. I've been to your house, full basement. I mean, it's not like you live in a little house.
Yeah. Yeah, but I've sort of tried to like on clothing and other stuff, that and if I haven't used something in a year, I need to seriously consider about giving it away. Or
do you think that when you're hiking and you got limited items, that it releases stress of, like when I go home, I'll have stuff everywhere than clothes that I hadn't worn in 10 years. I got 10 jackets in the closet, and I won't wear one of them.
Yeah, I think it does, because you don't have to consciously decide. If all of you got one coat, you don't have to go through any decision process if it's cold about what to put on.
Are those minuscule times what we need? I mean, how does that relieve stress? I mean, you say, okay, I want this coat or that coat.
Well, I think it has to do with sometimes making decisions creates stress, because especially if you're the kind of person that worries about consequences, you get into this, well, now, if I wear this one, what's people going to think of me about that? If I wear that one, are they going to like that better? How are they going to respond?
Or I got a pocket here, and what if I forget to get it out of that pocket when I take it in the washroom?
Just lots of stuff that if you have the tendency to, you know, go down those rabbit holes, you know, too much, then probably if you limit the choices, there's less stress.
No matter how small the choice is.
Yeah, no matter how, because lots of times it's not even what you're thinking about. The consequences of it are typically almost inconsequential. So you're wasting a lot of time in your mental energy trying to go through this.
try to think. I probably think too much.
Yeah.
But
I
now
understand.
the minimalist, I've got in my closet. I got my work boots, my old work boots, and the old work boots. And I wear sandals.
Mm-hmm.
So those things are just stuff in the way. You think that subconsciously adds a little stress that's minuscule?
It could be. It could.
For some people, but others it doesn't.
Right. Some people it wouldn't. It just depends on the kind of person you are. I know some people that they wouldn't give it. They have everything scattered around. They just go pick up what they want to. They don't give it a single thought.
My oldest son may walk out of the house without his shoes on.
Yeah.
That's how much it bothers him.
But I think you said it correctly, and I have that problem too. Is that sometimes we think too much.
Oh, I'm thinking of every consequence there is.
Yeah. And that just like so many things can be a blessing and a curse. If you think too little, it could be disaster. If you think too much about too many things that aren't worth thinking about, it can.
And if you think too much about thinking too much, now you're thinking too much.
Yeah. The onion has so many layers.
So the one thing, but I can see how these minimalists got to where they're to where they are. Mm-hmm. Could you ever live like that? Sell your house and live as long as you had somewhere for the grandkid to spend the night?
Well, we thought about downsizing. We thought about and talked a little bit about that, but we're just not quite ready for that. But I could see myself. My wife and I actually kind of have a similar conversation as this from time to time about how that since we both came from poverty, I mean real poverty, how that we can be content with a lot less than we have now and still enjoy life.
Yeah, it almost gets in the way.
Sometimes. I was thinking the other day, if you got 3 or 4 lawnmowers, if you got a boat, if you've got a UTV, if you got this, that, and the other that all needs to be maintained and can break down, they all can cause you anxiety.
That you don't know you've got.
Yeah. I mean, it just has to do with stuff. Like you say, if you have all that stuff, then things can happen to stuff. And if that stuff's really important to you, then it creates some grief.
And you feel like people that are responsible feel like they got to maintain this thing.
Yeah.
They got to keep up with it.
Yeah. And especially if you're a person that likes perfection and doesn't like to have anything wrong with anything. My wife has accused me occasionally of fixing stuff before it really needs to be fixed. And interestingly enough, my sister is the same way.
Was she you only have one sibling or what?
Well, she is my only full sibling. I have 2 other half siblings. My mother was married to another fellow before she married my father. So both those siblings are older than us 2, and they're still in Mississippi.
But you're closer to the...
Yeah, because she lives a couple of miles away from me, so we're...
Did she go to Lee too?
No. She just... At the time, she was married, and they moved up here, and because they liked Tennessee, and then they moved back to Mississippi for a while, and then they moved back up here, and then she got a divorce, so she just stayed up here.
It's good to have your sister close, isn't it?
Well, it's good. We do things for each other. So it's good to have family.
With family, you don't have to pay them.
Right. But they do ask you to do a lot.
Yeah, you got to repay the favor.
Yeah, because I just finished helping paint her house. And
when you wake up in the mornings, do you ever think, oh, I got to go to work? And you think, oh, no, how long have you been retired now? 2 years?
I retired in late December of 2019.
Just before the pandemic.
I told the lady who
it was just a minute.
I told the lady that took over the job, her name's Paula.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
She does a good job.
She and I talk from time to time, and she swears that I knew the pandemic was coming because I bailed right before.
Yeah.
But all I told her is I say I thank the good Lord because a higher power knew that I would not handle the pandemic very well, and that she was much better able to handle it.
Well, you might have, if it wouldn't have been that, it'd have been, you know how life, it's always something.
But even after, like say, 38 and a half years of doing that, I was ready. I spent a lot of time with her, coaching her, working with her, getting her ready to take over that role, and I was ready. I mean, you just get to a point where your life, you have stages in your life where you're ready for something else.
Did you know you were done?
Yeah. And part of it had to do with rules and regulations. I still liked the cause, I liked the work, but I was just so completely fed up with dealing with state and federal bureaucracies and rules and regulations. And I just had
But in the beginning they had rules and regulations, but it just got worse and worse and worse.
Well, it's like a pipe that after a while, just the accumulation of lime or whatever, running through it, in the water or whatever just accumulates, and it gets to a point where it's just clogged. And I can think of some other analogies too, but I won't use them.
But it just got to where you just couldn't.
Yeah, you just reach your level of just, I can't. It's kind of like kidney dialysis. You have your kidneys have to cleanse the toxins and the waste out of your body. When you can't get that done, you die. And in a sense, sometimes when you're dealing with many things, if you can't get it out, and even though during the years I would hike, I would take vacations, and they help relieve. They helped me last longer than I thought I probably would.
Yeah.
But I got to a point where I said, enough's enough. I've done enough. I've taken my, I'm ready to turn this over to somebody else, let them take it wherever, they and the board want to take it.
And you know what? You have to quit on a good note. You have to find the right
Well,
time.
it's ideally better.
Like
It's better.
Seinfeld quit after 6 seasons. He said he wanted to quit on top before he went down.
Well, I felt like I did that because I felt like that over the years I had a reputation of honor and integrity and competence, and that I worked hard to achieve that, and I felt like that I couldn't see anything beyond that, so I was ready to go.
And do you think that the regulations or the rules and everything that goes with it, it was getting to where your patients weren't as good as they used to be with it?
Yeah. You're tolerant.
Yeah.
It's like anything. You can just your tolerance for it. You lose your flexibility. You lose your ability to let it roll off. It's like even waterproof fabric. Like you can buy a coat that's waterproof.
Yeah.
A lot of them, after a while, that water repellent coating wears off, and you have to renew it. And usually when you renew it, it's not quite like it was when it was brand new. It'll last you some, but it really gets to the point where you can't really renew it very much, and forever. I guess I describe myself that way, is that I felt like it was time. I'd done enough good. I was ready to give somebody else a turn.
And you did a lot of good. I mean, you think about the Head Start, the women's
family violence
programs. What else was there?
We had the Head Start. We had the state pre-K education. Those were the ones that we were doing.
And that's a big thing.
Well, we probably impacted 3,000 families a year. If you multiply that by 25 or 30 years.
Plus the spin-off families that it affects.
Yeah. So,
what would Cleveland be like without Family Resource Agency?
Well, I don't think it would be quite as good as it is, and I feel very blessed that we got a lot of community support. Our local United Way was always so helpful to us, and so supportive, and we appreciate that. The school systems, and we even found that, you know, in other counties too, you know, because even though we were headquartered here, you know, we covered 4 counties in southeast Tennessee and 6 counties of northwest Georgia, and we found lots of people out there who were just like we were, wanted, you know, just trying to help families and children have a better life through education, you know, and intervention and things. And that sort of is a good thing. That, I mean, that's a high calling, you know.
I don't know what a better calling would be.
If you can try to help your fellow man have a better, more decent life, then, you know, that's pretty good.
You've had a life well lived, James, and it's not over yet.
I'm hoping it's not over yet. I've still got a few years left.
Happy trails. I always enjoy talking to you.